The hall shimmered with alien light, every surface vibrating softly with energy that seemed alive. I stepped cautiously onto the translucent floor, feeling a tingle as if the room itself were judging me. I had been summoned to the capital of the Thrynn Empire, a civilization whose history stretched back tens of thousands of years, and whose technology made our entire solar system look like a child's toy. I was the first human ever to be invited to the court of Empress Lyra, and I had no idea why. Humans were considered primitive by most interstellar species, and to be honest, I still felt it. My suit, custom-fitted for space travel, clung awkwardly, making me feel like a clumsy animal among these elegant beings who moved with purpose and grace. The Empress herself emerged from a cascade of light at the far end of the hall. She was taller than any human, her skin shifting color like liquid silver, and her eyes, well, I had never seen anything like them, pulsed with a soft internal glow. I swallowed hard. "You are different," she said, her voice both melodic and commanding, reverberating in my chest. I bowed my head instinctively, a small human gesture of respect. She frowned slightly. "Humans bow?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. I straightened immediately. "We do," I said, "but we don't kneel." Her eyes widened, and I sensed a ripple of amusement, or was it disbelief, pass through the crowd behind her. These were the royal advisors and generals of the Thrynn Empire, their faces a tapestry of curiosity, suspicion, and expectation. "I thought you would kneel," Lyra admitted softly, almost as if she were confessing a secret. "In all our histories, all species kneel when they are in the presence of the Empress. Humans are unusual." "I guess that's true," I said. "We like standing on our own feet. It's a matter of principle." Her laughter was like chimes in a crystal cave. The sound made the room shimmer, and for a moment, I felt lighter, less like an intruder in this alien world. "Then you shall stand," she declared. "We will see if your principles are as strong as your presence." And so began the trial. For the next several days, I was put through tests I could hardly comprehend. They examined my intelligence, my physical capabilities, my ethics, and even my emotions. In a court where deception was an art, and survival often relied on subtle manipulation, the fact that I remained human, direct, blunt, unyielding, made me a curiosity. The first trial was the Hall of Mirrors, a labyrinth of refracted energy and illusion. Other species faltered, deceived by phantasms of themselves or their worst fears. I walked forward, not trusting the reflections, but trusting my instincts. I touched nothing, judged nothing, and somehow emerged unscathed. Lyra watched silently from her balcony, her expression unreadable. Next came the test of hearts. I was asked to negotiate peace between two warring factions of Thrynn generals, beings whose lifespan exceeded centuries and whose grudges lasted millennia. I argued for compromise, for empathy, and for understanding. My words were crude compared to their polished diplomacy, but perhaps because they were genuine, they carried weight. I could feel Lyra's eyes on me, her interest intensifying. And then came the final challenge. The Empress herself descended into the hall, her presence filling every corner, every particle of the air. She carried a weapon unlike anything I had seen, an ancient device of the Thrynn, capable of erasing thought and memory with a touch. "You may leave," she said calmly, "or you may kneel and pledge fealty to the Empire. Choose now." I took a deep breath. The human's instinct, the one that had kept us alive for millennia, whispered in my mind, "Survival, yes, but not at the cost of surrendering who you are." "I do not kneel," I said firmly. "I respect your empire. I respect you. but I cannot betray myself. Humans do not kneel. Silence that followed was absolute. The air seemed to thicken, and I could hear the collective heartbeat of the court, every Thrynn alive, holding theirs in shock. Then Empress Lyra smiled. "You are remarkable," she whispered, almost to herself. "So few have the courage to stand, even when they are utterly outmatched." She lowered her weapon. "And that is why you shall remain. Not as a subject, not as a servant, but as a partner. An equal. A human among Thrynn." I felt disbelief, relief, and pride swirl inside me. For the first time, I realized that my defiance, my refusal to kneel, was not a weakness but a bridge. Over the next months, I learned the depths of the Thrynn civilization. Their cities floated in orbit around stars, their ships spent light and time, and their knowledge of the universe made our solar system's history seem like a bedtime story. Lyra and I spent hours discussing everything: philosophy, warfare, art, even the strange humor of humans, which she seemed to find endlessly fascinating. But not all were pleased with my presence. Some advisors whispered that a human had no place in the court, that my pride could lead to disaster. They plotted, schemed, tried subtle manipulations to undermine me. But each time, I relied on the same principle that had kept me alive in the Hall of Mirrors and the Test of Hearts: honesty, courage, and refusing to bend where bending would betray myself. Lyra watched it all quietly, intervening only when the plots became dangerous. In those moments, I saw a different side of her. The Empress, not as a ruler, but as someone who valued loyalty and courage above all else. I began to understand that her empire was built not on fear, but on respect, respect that she reserved for those who dared to stand their ground. And then came the threat that would define our bond. A neighboring species, the Draxil, had long coveted Thrynn technology. Their fleet appeared at the edge of the system, a wall of weapons and dark intent. The Thrynn generals called for submission, for sacrifice, but I knew that humans had a different approach. Sometimes, I told Lyra, "You have to stand firm, even when the odds are impossible. You show them you are not afraid, and often they will respect that more than any weapon." She studied me carefully. "And you believe humans can fight them off?" "I believe humans don't know how to back down. That counts for something." The battle was nothing I could have imagined. The Draxil attacked with ferocity and cunning, but the Thrynn and I fought with unity and strategy that was almost human in its unpredictability. I led a small fleet in maneuvers that the Thrynn themselves admitted were unconventional, terrifying, and brilliant. When we finally confronted the Draxil flagship, I boarded it alone. They expected surrender. They did not expect humanity. I stood tall as their leader demanded my obedience. "I do not kneel," I said, the words echoing in the metallic chamber. "And you will not take this empire while I draw breath." In that moment, something strange happened. The Draxil hesitated, then withdrew. It was as if my refusal, my stubborn human defiance, had created a resonance they could not penetrate. We had won, not by overwhelming power, but by standing resolute. Lyra was waiting on the observation deck when I returned. Her eyes glimmered with something I could not name: pride, yes, but also something deeper. "You were right," she said simply. "Humans do not kneel. And sometimes, that is exactly what an empire needs." Years later, I became more than a guest or a novelty. I became a counselor, a strategist, and, in some strange way, Lyra's confidant. The court no longer whispered doubts about the human who refused to bow. They told stories of how I had helped save the empire, of the human who stood while everyone else would kneel. And Lyra? She sometimes caught me staring at the stars, thinking of home, and she would smile, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You chose to stand," she said, "and because of that, you chose a place beside me." I didn't kneel then, nor ever again. But I knew I had found a kingdom where standing firm was more powerful than submission, and a connection that crossed species, culture, and the very definition of loyalty. In the end, the Thrynn learned something about humans. We may be fragile, imperfect, and unpredictable, but we also have an unshakable core. And that is something no weapon, no empire, and no empress can ever take from us. I had entered the court thinking I would be judged, tested, perhaps even humiliated. Instead, I found respect, purpose, and something far stranger, belonging. And I never knelt, not once.